So while I was doing my research, I started coming across a lot of representations of ascetics, Indian dervishes and other people who were in fact turned out that they're actually representations of yogis. And I started to get more and more intrigued by that, just to understand why are there so many representations of these Hindu yogis, these sannyasis, in paintings that are clearly patronized by the Muslim elite, Mughals hoye, yeah, even before that in the Sultanate period. So I started to look at parallels in the literature, and even today when we think about the Jogis, it's very much connected to our devotional culture, ke Ranja Jogi ho gaya, ya main jana jogiyan de naal. So uska matlab kya hai? What is the meaning behind all of this? We always talk about the Jogis, immediately there's this sort of image that does come into our mind of going with the Jogis, becoming part of the Jogis, and Heer Ranja, Sasi Punnu, all these old stories. So why is it that the Jogis are so important? And you also see the representations in paintings again and again. So that's why I thought I would present this little section called The Sufi in the Garb of a Jogi, Visual and Literary Articulations of Sanctity from the Chandayan to the Salim album. So let's first unpack the title so that we know what we're talking about. Chandayan ya Chandayana is one of the earliest Sufi romances in the subcontinent. During the Sultanate period, starting from around the 14th century, you start getting these epic romances written by local South Asian Sufis using the local language or the language's dialects. Zaire Urdu to nahi thi jab. So it's more to do with the local Hindavi dialects. Awadhi ho gayi, Dakkani ho gayi, Purbi, is tarah ke chote, jo bhi local dialects the. In that, they started to put these folk stories. Some of them were folk, rural village stories, things like that from the subcontinent. But then these Sufis injected them with very specific Sufi terminology, and they were written for various functions. For example, the one that we'll talk a little bit about today is called the Chandayan. It is the story, the love story, Ashiq or Mashook ki kahani between the hero, who is Lorak, and the heroine, which is Chandayan, ya Chanda, sorry, Lor and Chanda ki kahani. And every time what happens is that the setting of these stories, we'll look at two today. The setting of these stories is in a pre-Islamic, almost like a mythic India, as South Asia, in which you have the setting of a local Raja with the daughter, and then the other kingdom with his son, and then they fall in love and those sort of things. But the Sufis injected it with the meaning in which the woman, the Mashuqa, she became the symbol for God, for the divine. That's why usually they're called Chanda, or some sort of symbol of divinity. And the hero became the everyman, the traveler on the Sufi path. And then there were always the guide figure, and sometimes there were many guides. So and everything was usually done in steps or stages. There was always 7 stages to cross this, and the guide would always give some sort of mantra, to invocation, zikr, to do things like that. It's very clearly made for the Sufi acolyte, but it was also commissioned in courts. So Mulla Daud was the composer of the Chandayan, and we'll look at a few images of that, and that was commissioned by one of the local courts in Awadh, under I think it was one of the Khilji kings, if I'm not mistaken. And so it was for the courts, entertainment for the court, but it was also made for the khanqah. In fact, one of the manuscripts of the Chandayan came from one of the big khanqahs in India, Manakpur mein. So it shows that they were being functioned as that. And in fact, this story, Chandayan, is actually it's recorded in the history that it was also used in the 14th century and the 15th century in the khutbah of the Jummah in Delhi. They used to add the story of the Chandayan as an example during the khutbah of the Friday prayers, which is fascinating. Because the language of these stories is very erotic, and yet the meaning of it is very, very esoteric as well. So, and then when we talk about the Salim album, of course, the Prince Salim is, of course, Jahangir. And in around 1599, he rebelled against his father Akbar, who ruled for so long, and Salim was getting very impatient. He wanted to become king. And so finally he went to Allahabad and established his own court. And he took a lot of painters, key painters from Akbar's court, into his own court. And there were some really beautiful manuscripts and albums that were made especially for Salim by these really great artists, who then later on became one of the greatest Mughal painters or Indian painters in history. So this page that we're looking on the left is from the Salim album, and we'll talk about that as well. And then the manuscripts of the Chandayan, the ones that we are looking today, specifically the most famous Chandayana manuscript was originally in the Lahore Museum. So it's called the Lahore-Chandigarh Chandayan, because after partition, half of it went into Chandigarh, half of it stayed in Lahore. And it was illustrated and written down in somewhere between the 1500 to 1550. So this is called pre-Akbar period painting. So the Chandayana story itself was very, very popular in the Sultanate period and gained a lot of popularity just before the Akbar period in the late Sultanate period. 1500 to 1550, you have lots of illustrations of the Chandayana in North India. So, let's start then. So specifically today I'll focus on representations of a particular sect of the Jogis, which is the Nath Yogis. And I'm sure many of you have heard of the Nath Yogis, or the Jogi as it's called in our local language. And you see them represented in Mughal painting specifically a lot. They're also called kanphat ya kanphata because they wear these large earrings, and immediately you can recognize them for their large earrings here, for example. Especially these round black earrings. Sometimes they would actually split their ears and pierce the cartilage in order so that the heavy metal earrings don't fall down. And they are the followers of Gorakhnath, Goraksha, who is a mythic medieval period saint, a follower of Shiva. So they're specifically really severe ascetics, wandering ascetics who were followers of Shiva. But so then we'll talk about how, so just like Sufis ya tasawwuf ki tarah, jis tarah tasawwuf mein usi tarah there is a similarity between Sufis and the Nath Yogis in the sense that they both believe in one God, in a one absolute God, which they call Nirgun, which is the Sanskrit word, and of course we call Mutlaq, an absolute entity. So that's one thing that they have in common with Sufism. And today I will discuss the presence of the Nath Yogi or the Jogi as an emblem or surrogate for the Islamic path of Tasawwuf as visualized in Indian painting. And try to show how the Yogi is both an archetype for the Salik or the Sufi traveler in 15th and 16th century Sufi romances like the Chandayan, as well as a figure of spiritual aspiration in the Salim period, the early Jahangir period. So from the very beginning of the Sultanate period, especially in the Sultanate period literature, which is around starting with the 14th century right into the first half of the 16th century with this Prem Kahanis, the figure of the Sufi freely traversed different social hierarchies and synchronously performed various functions. And just like specifically in the Prem Kahani that I explained, composers of medieval Sufi romances were at once representatives of imperial courts and Sufi orders, Sufi tariqas. In all the major epics, beginning with the Chishti Mulla Daud's Chandayan, which was written in 1379, the location is always a pre-Islamic India, set in a mythic time and space. And it is against this backdrop that the protagonist, often portrayed as a male Kshatriya prince, falls in love with a beautiful princess, who is usually very elusive. In these heroes' quest stories, after a brief and unfulfilled union, the lovers are always parted, and then the real story starts. And usually in these stories, the hero is also married to another wife already. So it also has to do with The Sultan is a very important figure in this love triangle. But then for the Sufis, the first wife becomes the symbol of dunya, and the second wife, the wife to be, is the symbol for akhirat, ya jannat, ya khuda. And in the end of the day, he has to leave his worldly wife to find the spiritual wife, and after all the adventures and everything, he brings her back. And then usually the worldly wife and the spiritual wife have a cat fight, in which they're literally tearing their hair out and everything. In the Chandayana, that fight happens in the temple. It's a Ram temple, I think. Yeah, Ram temple, and Ram becomes so exasperated that he leaves the temple. He gets so ashamed that there's actually a painting in the Chandayana manuscript in which Ram is just running away from the temple, and they're just tearing their hair out. And then eventually the idea is that you have to balance both the dunya and the ruhaniyat. And so eventually, in the end, all three of them live together in the kingdom. And then, of course, all of the stories end in somehow or the other, the prince dying, and then the other wives committing sati. Because at the end of the day, true union can't happen in the world. That's the idea. So in these heroes' quest stories, after a brief and unfulfilled initial union, the lovers are parted and the hero is left distraught, searching desperately for his lost beloved. And no one knows the way to the city of the Chanda except for the Jogi. The Jogi is the one who usually guides him. So they were locally known as Prem Kahanis, and often derived from indigenous folk stories. And the Sultanate period Sufis were first and foremost writing for a Muslim audience. And they reworked these Indic motifs by charging them with Sufi symbols. The figure of the beautiful Indian princess signifies the divine beloved, as I've just said. And her city is understood to be paradise, the Quranic Jannat. The Chandayana opens with a long praise to the city Govar, where the princess Chanda is born. And it's a long opening of that. The Quranic fruits of paradise are reflected in the paradisal fruits of South Asia. They explain all the paradisal fruits of South Asia. And then the Sufi khanqah is then reimagined as a Buddh-khana, a temple complex whose description immediately follows the mention of the fruits and vegetables of the beautiful city of Govar, of Chanda. Basically, it's the setting of paradise. And here is the painting itself. The Buddh-khana is simultaneously an enactment of the perfect Sufi khanqah and of paradise. In the realm of the Jogi and his ashram, replete with the central pool over here, singing birds and fruits from all seasons, represents the archetypal man, the Insan al-Kamil, and his inner paradisal state. So here you can see, this is how exactly he describes it in the book. The Mulla Daud represents it like that. And here you can see the representation. Here's Mulla Daud himself, narrating the story either to a courtier, a nobleman, or his disciple. And here you can see the ashram itself. This is the page. And at the top is the ashram surrounding the pool. And then here are all the different types of jogis. And they're all Nath jogis, because we can see they're wearing these singi necklaces, which are also little whistles made out of their horn. And some of them also have larger. And then you also see that one of them is sitting on a leopard skin. And all of these ideas were actually exchanged between the Sufis and the Nath yogis. So the bottom register here, this one, is a sea of blue punctuated by three distinct types of Nath yogis. Lean, ash-smeared ascetics. ये जो काले हुए हैं उन्होंने अपने ऊपर मिट्टी जहाँ क्या कहते हैं, राख, exactly, राख या ash ऊपर डाली हुई है. Then you have these ones with garbs, which are very similar to wandering dervishes, which is interesting to see as well. Patched cloaks, जिसको मुरक्का कहते हैं. And then there's the third type as well, which you can see distinctly with that don't have this rakh on their skins. And this relates with the three types mentioned in the text itself. More importantly, the image also provides a specific window into a 16th century Shaivite ashram, which is interesting. The large earrings and the small black deer horns on the threads, known as singis, which every one of them is wearing, and around the necks of all the holy men, suggests that they are followers of Gorakhnath. Since many Sufis entering the subcontinent from the west, yani Central Asia, in this 13th and 14th centuries, saw the Nath conception of an absolute or nirgun, transcendent God, as synonymous with their own Islamic conceptions, they readily mixed with Jogis, sharing practices and ideas freely. And we actually have yoga manuals written by Sufis, especially Chishti Sufis and the Shattari Sufis at this time, which were actually used in their daily zikr and aurad ke liye. One of them is actually illustrated for Salim also. It's a manual on Hatha Yoga. And they will specifically say कि इस zikr के साथ ये, इस दम के साथ ये, इस posture में बैठना है. But it's very detailed, which is very fascinating as well. So this is the same time, it's a shared landscape. In this Lahore-Chandigarh Chandayan folio from the 16th century, particular traits that were shared by both Sufis and Jogis include the Muraqqa, the patched cloak, the animal skin rug that this Sufi on the left is sitting here, and very specifically the figure with this large white dog who's entering wearing that Muraqqa. He could almost look like a Sufi, but for his earrings, which you can't see in this, it's slightly blurred, and also the singi. The Sufis never wore these singi necklaces because they weren't used for any ritualistic purposes by the Sufis. But apart from that, it's very similar. This person is very similar to a wandering qalandar ya darvesh. So with these characteristics, the yogis shown congregating in this ashram are pretty much interchangeable with Muslim holy men. They're participants in a shared South Asian devotional world, inhabited by Naths, Vaishnava sants and Sufis, who all shared a common notion of divinity, namely a nirgun ya mutlaq God. So having established this, and here's oh, I forgot. I put some details in here, so now we can actually see. You can see this necklace that they wear, which is particular to the Nath yogi. And here's the leopard skin that they're sitting on, and this wonderful dog and this dog motif is another very interesting aspect. As you can see, I'm just showing some comparisons with Sufis now. Sufis done slightly later during the Mughal time. This one is from the Salim album. Here you see Bakri ke saath. There's a bakra, but this is definitely a qalandar because the text says so. So we know that this is a qalandar, even though he's wearing the same Nath yogi wali earring. He has the same horn as this guy, and he also has the same sort of idea of the animal as this person. And then here you also have another idea of a qalandar who actually has this patched cloak, Muraqqa, folded on his shoulders. So that's also interesting to see that overlap. So then we can look at some examples of within the Chandayana how the Jogi becomes a surrogate for the Sufi. How does it participate in that in the story itself? So when the story starts, after all the praise of the city and everything, one day a Jogi named Bajir, who is walking around, bheek mangte hue ja raha hota hai sheher se sheher, he finally comes into Govar. And so he comes to the palace of Chanda, and he's knocking on the door. Suddenly someone from the balcony door opens, and Chanda shows her face out into the street. And the Bajir Jogi looks up, and as soon as he looks up at her, he faints. And the text, Mulla Daud's text says, it's as if he found a new life, which is very symbolic, of course. It's the moment of fana, when you have the vision of the divine. It's very synonymous with Hazrat Musa's vision of the mountain, and then it's almost like he's given a new faith. As the Quran says, he's given a new faith once he comes back from his fainting. So a similar thing happened, and I think he's actually evoking that exact Quranic episode in a very local Indic sense. So once he sees Chanda, of course Chanda then closes the door and goes away, but when he wakes up, all he can think about is Chanda's beauty, because he's witnessed this divine flash, and he, fearing that he might not be able to keep it in himself and start shouting out her name everywhere in the city, he runs away from the city. Varna bhi maar khayega. So he goes into the next neighboring city of Rupchand, who's the king of that city, and he starts to sing praises because they all travel with their little kingri or tambura, and he starts singing praises of Chanda. And he hears of the praises, And here you can see, once again sitting on a leopard skin. He has the same singi necklace and the earring and the top knot. That's the other thing which is very typical of local in South Asian spirituality. And he's sharing the story of Chanda's beauty, which takes pages and pages of the story itself, to Roop Chand. It's called Naksik ya Sarapa Tarif Karna. So that's it's 21 sections of the praises of the beauty, from foot to toe, all the aspects of the body and everything. And so he falls in love with her, and he says that I have to now capture the princess for myself and marry her. But he's too weak himself, so he hires a gun for hire, basically, who's called Lorak. Lorak is a local Kshatriya fighter, and he hires him कि जाओ मेरे लिए वो जो है capture the princess for me. So once he invades the town, Lorak sees her, he falls in love with her, and he says, to hell with all of that, let's elope. And they both fall in love with each other. She's already married to an old man who's impotent, blind, and has a broken leg. So he's useless. It just shows basically, the meaning to it's we can talk about later. So anyway, so they elope and then the story starts. It's a long story of how finally they come together. But in any case, the link between God, Chanda, and the worldly follower is this Jogi. That's what we're trying to show, that he is the one who brings back the story, almost like Moses bringing back the tablets, or that sort of idea, into the world. So that's also wonderful. And here are just some other examples from other manuscripts of the same story. This is from the famous Bombay Prince of Wales Chandayana, which is dispersed now. And you have the same thing happening here. Bajir Jogi sitting on the leopard skin is telling the story, and he's just fainting just by listening to the story. This is Roop Chand. वो इतने मदहोश हो गए सिर्फ उनकी तारीफ सुन के, इतनी खूबसूरती से तारीफ की जोगी ने कि मैं कहा ओह बिल्कुल ही आउट हो गए. So then we come to another example of how the Jogi, in both literature and painting, serves as a surrogate for the Sufi guide, as the Sheikh or the Murshid. This is another story written by a Suhrawardī Sheikh, Qutban, unka naam tha, and it was written in 1503 or 1506, I think. This is the earliest representation of it, and in this, the beloved is called Mirigāvatī. Mrig is a doe या हिरन. हिरनी को संस्कृत में मृग कहते हैं, मृगावती यानी हिरनी. So she is once again this godlike sort of beloved who can change shape and fly and things like that, but usually she changes the shape into a deer, a doe. So it's a long story, but what for us is important is that Jahangir fell in love with the story, Prince Salim, as a young person. And so it was actually translated from the local Hindavi into Persian, which is also interesting, for Salim in 1603, after 100 years of its compilation. And unfortunately, I didn't have a very good image of this, but here's another page of that. In this, the function of the Jogi is even more apparent than the Chandayana, because after initially what happens is that the Mirigāvatī, who is the doe woman, every year comes to this beautiful sagar to bathe with her sahelis. And what happens is that one day the hero is out hunting, and as he's out hunting, he sees this beautiful 7-colored doe, hirni dekhta hai 7 rangon wali. So he starts to hunt and chase her. As he's going, she finally jumps into this pool. And as she jumps into this pool, she changes her shape into her normal shape, which is this stunningly beautiful woman. And uski to aqal dang reh jati, he gets off his horse and jumps into the pool. But before he knows it, she's disappeared. And what he does, for a year, this becomes totally lost. That aur kuch nahi kar sakta, apni kingdom chhod deta. He loses all his senses. He builds a little palace. 7 manzila palace banata hai, uske andar there's a picture pavilion. It's quite a symbolic palace. And then he waits for her to come. Finally, she comes again. He captures her and forcibly marries her. And then the story that Mirigāvatī says is that one day she flies away. Just before she flies away, she says that you can't find love forcibly. And the whole theme of this story is about prem ras, the ras of this of prem. And in order to find the prem ras, you have to become an initiate on the path of, in this case, of the Nath Jogi. But the Qutban is very clear that it's obviously the Sufi path. And then Zuhud or Tawakkul ke through is the only way you can find prem. This forceful capturing prem, ki mujhe abhi experience chahiye, that cannot happen. You have to be patient and have trust in God. So that's the theme of the story. And then, of course, once she flies away, he goes in search of her. He doesn't know where to go, but almost like it was a done thing. What Qutban says is, as soon as he starts to leave his city, he takes off his princely clothes and wears the clothes of a jogi, which is very interesting. It's almost like that's the done thing. Once you go off in search of God, you wear the clothes of a jogi. And that's what he does here. Over here you can see he's wearing the stitched garb, which both Sufis and Jogis used to wear. And he is in a Jogi ashram once again, acting like a Jogi. And here he's a traveling Jogi with a veena. And he has just left his city over here. And this is a beautiful, I wish I had a colored picture, I don't have that. But you can see here is the city that he's left. And over here is the symbolic cosmic tree of life. And usually in all Persian and Mughal paintings, you see the tree of life coming in whenever there's a devotional theme being represented. Chahe wo Nizami ka khamsa ho, chahe wo Amir Khusro ki shairi ho, ya Firdausi ka Shahnama ho, jo bhi ho, uske andar usually you always see this tree principle coming in, and usually from the roots of the tree emanates the water of life. And it usually links with that Majma al-Bahrain wala water of life, which divides the worldly realm from the spiritual realm. And in this case, this water is dividing the worldly kingdom with the path of the Jogi here, which he's just started walking on. So it's a very clear division. And also there's another sort of division that the tree is making, that on the right side you have the worldly kingdom, and on the left side you have an ashram or a shrine, which is also interesting. Ashram is a Hindu temple. The Hindu khanqah, where you live, where the Jogis and people live. And the other interesting thing, which unfortunately here it's cut off because we couldn't get the PowerPoint to work, but here you see actually pairing happening, which is very interesting because over here you have the Hiran and the Hirni are already united under the tree of life. It's almost like a premonition of what is about to happen at the end of the story, in which Rajkavar and Mirigāvatī eventually find their union. So even though this is the start of the story, they're already showing that this is where it will end up after a lot of adventures and things. So that's also interesting to see. Oh, yeah. And here also you have a fox, Mr. Fox and a Mrs. Fox, living outside their little hole. Once again showing that this union is about to happen. And once again you have a duck and a Mrs. Duck, once again in union. So these are all premonitions of the story unfolding and going towards a sort of delayed idea of union. And here is an example of how in an Akbar period, 50 years later, in a Nizami's illustration of the Nizami's Khamsa, you have a similar idea of the tree of life, and then the stream or the water of the Abe Hayat flowing from the tree of life. And here it's not very clear, but actually in the painting, once again, you have the pairing of the animals under the tree of life. Because this is the place where the worldly seeker unites with the heavenly reality. Knowledge. And it's, of course, the tree of knowledge also, absolutely. And then, just like here you have the city or the worldly space in the background, in the Akbar period, this motif was established really, in which they used the Renaissance-like techniques to represent a very spiritual, devotional function, which is fascinating. That the world is in the background and then the main story is happening in the foreground. So then we jump to the Salim album, a few pages from the Salim album. So an album in Urdu, Farsi and Arabic is called a Muraqqa, same as the patched cloak of the Sufis, because ruqqa is a piece of cloth or paper, and ruqe jama karke muraqqa banta hai. So जिस तरह कपड़े का भी टुकड़े जमा करके कपड़ा बनता है उसी तरह, तो इसलिए that's why they're both called a muraqqa. And here, interestingly, it's a very popular, famous album, but no one to this day has ever talked about the Sufis and the Jogis in this album. Almost more than half of the pages in this album have to do with this theme. The theme of the Jogi, the theme of the Darwish, or the theme of Christ, or Sayyidatna Maryam. It's a very devotional theme, which is interesting. But we'll focus on these 2 pages, which are clearly, once again, Nath yogis. Very clearly. You can see from the same cloak over here that our Raj cover was wearing. This yogi is also wearing. And you see the singi, and you see the earrings. All of that shows very clearly that this is a jogi. And then when we look at the poetry, you also start to understand the meaning. What are the dogs doing here? The same dog that we saw before. What is the meaning or the symbolism of the dog that you keep seeing in Indian painting, especially under Mughal patronage? You keep seeing this dog with the darwish, dog with the jogi, sometimes dog on its own. So historically, if we look in the literature, Muslim literature, devotional literature, Fariduddin Attar, Maulana Rumi, and other people constantly use the symbol of the dog, Sag, to refer to the lower Nafs al-Amara, the carnal soul, which is always hungry, which is always desiring, and is always slightly wild. And the idea is not to kill the dog, but to tame the dog. And in order to do that, you need a guide, which in this case is so clear. Suddenly it makes all sense. Hanji.
The white dog is a symbol of the tamed soul.
Exactly, absolutely, exactly. And I'm about to read the text also. I can't read. Anyway, so in this case, the Sufis also a lot of these poets also refer to themselves as the dog. Okay, I am the dog of your doorstep. Dara Shikoh uses that all the time, referring to his shuyukh. And in that sense, Taimur Sahib is exactly right, that in this case, you have this beautiful painting. I hope I have a detail. I do have a detail. And now you can actually see it. It's beautifully done because over here you see that the Jogi himself is surrounded in this beautifully green halo. That he's sitting on this patch of green, the rest of the land is all barren. And in the background you have water and birds. And then the dogs are so happy. They're genuinely overjoyed because they are at peace with themselves by following the guide. And they're tame, totally tamed. They have their little collars. And in this case, the text, padhun Farsi mein? Acha. Dar firaq-e yar jogi gashte-am. Bahut simple. Behre-an dildar jogi gashte-am. So in the separation of my beloved, I have become a jogi. For that beloved, behre-an dildar, beraye-an dildar, for that dildar, I have become a jogi. Meel darat shah heman ba jogiyan. Ze-an sabab nachar jogi gashte-am. So my Shah, my Sheikh, my guide, my patron has an affinity with the Jogis. Meel darat Shah heman ba jogiyan. Ze-an sabab nachar jogi gashte-am. Is sabab se nachar, because of this helpless, I have become a Jogi. What can I do? My Sheikh, my guide has this close affinity with the Jogis, so I must become a Jogi as well. It's beautiful. It shows that overlap and connection. So separated from my beloved, I have become a Jogi. For that day, so we've looked at that. Now we can look at the other one, which is also very beautiful. In this, it's used in a slightly different way. Once again, the dog is a disciple, and that's the Sheikh type character. But you can see that he is giving his faiz to the dog by the way he's looking at him, focusing on the dog and also holding him. यहाँ से नहीं पकड़ते, पालने के लिए, बिल्कुल just to keep him under his guidance. It's a very different representation. This is more Jalali.
It's also more direct.
And it's much more direct. This one is much more Jamali. There's a sweetness. The figure of the Jogi is round. He's smiling, the dogs are playing. There's this sort of happiness all over. It's like a Jamali representation. This is much more direct, and Jalali, it's also, he's giving direction. He might even be chiding him. Ke baaz aa jao, theek ho jao. That sort of thing is happening here. And here, it's so bareek, I can't read the Persian. But lekin Angrezi padh sakte hain. I am the Jogi of love and am passionate for you. With every hair I desire you. My shirt is made with the dust of his lane, of the beloved's lane, and that too has blood from my eyes and is ripped to its hem. So that's a very typical Persian Urdu poetry trope. And then he says, I am one with the 72 nations. Yani ki I'm one with all the religions. That's what he's trying to say. I should have a rosary and a zannar, a Christian's girdle. Your dog is better than the entire world of fidelity. If I am not your dog, this dog is better than me. So it's very, very clear what's being done here. The function becomes very, very clear. So any questions thus far about these paintings? Am I missing anything? We can keep.
What's in the fact that this dog represents the tamed soul of the yogi himself?
That is also definitely one of the themes, absolutely.
Judging from the poetry, yes.
From the poetry also, exactly. But then it's also this, your dog is better than the entire world of fidelity. I think there's no one meaning, in the sense that it has at least 3 or 4 layered meanings to them. It is both the carnal soul of the Sufi or the Jogi. It's also the disciple of the Jogi or the Sufi. So it has these two meanings usually. And I'll show how that links with the way Dara Shikoh uses himself as the dog. So it's very much connected with that idea as well. Then we come to another wonderful folio in which it's very clearly a Darwish. It is a Sufi that is being shown. And once again, you see the dog on the right, and then an actual disciple. Unke paun pad raha hai. So I have fallen at his feet from helplessness. Dar pa ash uftade am bezari. Aya bood aanke dast girad. Would it be that he would take my hand? So baith ke liye kirpa kar rahe hain. And over here you have a very tame dog who is clearly once again under control. He's already in a way been initiated, and you can see how stable he is. There's a wonderful little detail which I don't have here. It's fascinating. Oh, Kangi. Over here, which you can't see very clearly away, but there's on this branch is a tiny light drawing of a monkey, a very mischievous looking monkey, which I think might represent the soul of the person who wants to be initiated, perhaps. Which is very interesting. But color is a beautiful neem rang. And once again, you have the tree of life, and the guide is standing right under the tree of life, because only he has access to the mysteries that are beyond. And it's beautifully represented. And here on this topi, and of course the book in his hand. And over here you have the signature of the artist who is Basavan, one of the greatest artists of the Akbar period. So just to give a comparison, these are from the same album, same Salim album, but how different representations of the more or less same theme, different angles of the same theme. Then just to give you the example that something which you first start seeing in the Salim album in 1604, 1605 is taken up very quickly first by his son, Shahzada Khurram, who became Shah Jahan in the Khurram album, and then later on in the very famous Dara Shikoh album. So I'm just trying to show how these ideas were carried further from father to son, that it wasn't something which Dara Shikoh imagined from out of nowhere. It's part of a longer tradition. But what actually the chapter I'm trying to show is that most of 20th century scholarship that is written on Dara Shikoh tries to show how Dara Shikoh was an unorthodox or heterodox syncretistic figure who had gone on to the other side and had become this liberal, almost like we are trying to impose our own socialist liberal type ideas onto the past and trying to identify with that. But in fact, when you actually look at the literature and the paintings and link it historically, the same tropes are being repeated again and again, right way back into the 12th, 13th century. It's something which the Mughals found in ek tarah se unhe virse mein mila, and then they added on it. They evolved the language, but the heart or the essence of the stories and the essence of the meaning remained the same. That didn't change. So Dara Shikoh himself was very much part of that heritage. He was very much Islamizing this whole world of the Jogis. It wasn't him becoming syncretistic, him becoming a rebel or a heterodox person. It was very much, as he keeps saying, that he is a practicing Muslim and he's Islamizing these aspects for his own benefit and for the benefit of his circle. So same in the Dara Shikoh album, the major theme of the album, apart from his own portraits and the portraits of his family, are Darweshes and Jogis. Once again.
But I can confuse the things. So there is that
yes,
coming through also.
Definitely, and yeah, definitely, especially visually as well as thematically also. But in this case, it becomes very clear that function is very clear. On the left side is a representation of a qalandar, and we don't need to go into the details of the qalandar right now, but in any case, and on the right side is most probably a Vaishnav Jogi, not a Sant, not a Nath. He's a Vaishnav Sant.
This picture also by the south?
No, this not certain who the painter is. Very similar idea. It's a beautiful painting. There's two of them facing each other. And then we just, right at the end, the last image, a short presentation. Right at the end, we can see how Dara Shikoh also uses this idea of the dog. So in this case, it's beautiful because he also mentions Lahore, so that's nice. In any case, he's writing, we are very fortunate to have 5 or maybe 6 letters that he wrote to one of his Murshidun, well, a bet to nahi hui thi inse, but one of his guides, Shah Dilruba. And Shah Dilruba, and he was really, really attached to Shah Dilruba, but Shah Dilruba never really gave him too much attention. Zyada lift nahi kara dete. He had gone into what we were discussing the other day. He had gone into parda. So he was khalwa mein chale gaye the, ya Muraqqa mein chale gaye the, Shah Dilruba. So Dara Shikoh used to... Really? Achha, I didn't realize that. Umri Ittiqaf. Very good, thank you. So he had gone into an Umri Ittiqaf, and Dara Shikoh kept writing to him to say कि एक बार अपनी हमें नज़र का फैज़ अता फरमा दें, and he kept going there. So Dilruba would write letters. He would even give him poems and things like that, but he would never show his face to him after a certain point. So over here he's trying to say that just reading this, har kuja im dil muqayyad tost. Wherever I am, my heart is trapped by you. Khah dar Agre im, khah dar Lahore. चाहे मैं लाहौर में जाऊं या आगरे में जाऊं, आपका ही सोचता हूं. उम्मीद के इन कम तरीन सगान दरगाह खुद रा फरामोश न कुनंद. I am hopeful that they, Shah Dilruba, remember this lowest of dogs of their threshold, that they don't forget or extinguish faramosh na kunand, they don't forget us. Man kist ham andar che shumaram che sagam tha ham rahi saganat bashad havasam. Yani ke who am I that I should be part of your group of dogs? मैं क्या हूँ? मैं तो सिर्फ, all I desire is to accompany your dogs. हम रही सगानत बाशद हवसम. और उसके बाद then he talks about दर काफले के उस्त दानम तरसम इन बस के रसद ज़दूर बांगे जरसम. तो इसका मुझे clear exact मतलब the last word, the last line I couldn't understand exactly.
आपके काफले के ऊँटों की घंटी है.
मैं हूँ घंटी. हाँ, that makes sense, yes. That I am missing the, yes, the bells of your qafla, your caravan. Yes. Wow. Dur se, yes, from afar. Bilkul. This is not just one letter. In letter after letter, that's the theme. And then he keeps calling himself the dog of your. So it's fascinating in that sense also. So in the end, I think I'll just end over here. Just wanted to show how there is a link, a historical, literary, and visual link between the local Indian, South Asian Muslim spirituality and how that local flavor is appropriated for a very distinctly Islamic Sufi function. And then it continues as in taken over by Dara Shikoh and Jahanara Begum. And then they use it and bring it to the even next level because they had the best artists in the court and they were the first siblings in the Mughal dynasty to actually be initiated, do the Baith under Mulla Shah. So then, because of all this history and this literary upbringing, they actually could use their artists to make representations of Mulla Shah, Shah Dilruba like this one, and many, many other people. So, thank you.
Thank you.